Dragon's Dogma 2 is the newly released action-adventure RPG developed by Capcom. This one is available to purchase on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, and is the sequel to the much-loved game released well over 10 years ago. The Dragon's Dogma series focuses on the story of the Arisen, a hero that is destined to fight a dragon who is said to bring the end of the world. Just as with the first game in the series, you'll play as the Arisen, with your ultimate goal being to save the world. This time, you'll begin your game in a slave camp where you escape with a pawn after a mysterious figure reveals to you that you are the Arisen. Fighting memory loss, you revisit an area that was recently attacked by a dragon, and your memories come flooding back to you. After this, you'll make your way to the main city of Vermont, only to discover there's a fake acting as the Arisen, so not only do you now need to deal with that, but you'll also need to set forth to fulfill your destiny as the Arisen. If you've had a chance to play the original Dragon's Dogma game, the story will feel very similar. You find out that you're the Arisen, you make your way to the main city, do some tasks, and then defeat the dragon. While I really enjoyed this story layout for the first game, I found it got quite confusing for Dragon's Dogma 2. One of the main aspects, as mentioned before, is that there is this fake Arisen pretending to be you, who is sitting on the throne. While this makes for quite the interesting story initially, it sort of fizzles out and doesn't amount to anything or impact later towards the story. When I reached the ending of the game, I somehow felt as though I had missed 20 hours of story just to wrap it all up neatly. It left for a very unsatisfying end and overall quite a boring story. To start off with, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Dragon's Dogma series, this game is heavily focused on combat. As the Arisen, you'll help out citizens, provide aid where you can, and explore a large open world in search of resources and loot. It's your classic open world RPG in a medieval setting, which for me is basically my absolute favourite type of game. I recently played the first Dragon's Dogma game a couple of months ago and I loved it. In Dragon's Dogma 2, there's a whole new open world to explore, with 2 main cities and a few other towns scattered about. One of the things I wanted in the first Dragon's Dogma game is more cities and towns, and this one definitely delivered. Not only is there more, but they're bigger, more detailed, and more lively. Add to this that you can actually buy multiple houses here, and I'm one happy gal. On top of this, I found the world to be much more interesting. It's split into 2 kind of areas. You have this grassy, lush northern area which features the city of Vermont. There's cave systems here, several towns, beautiful streams, and it just feels much more like a living, breathing world. South of here you'll find a kind of desert, arid area with the city of Battahl. This area is stunning with lots of valleys, ruins, more cave systems to explore, and just a totally different vibe. And I really just appreciated this diversity in the world. You'll find chests scattered everywhere, some of which can be quite tricky to reach, and as you explore, your pawns will kindly point these out to you along with other places of interest. Exploration is quite interesting in this way, as you can stumble across various goodies, and you're also really rewarded for just going into every nook and cranny you can find, as there will often be something there waiting for you. Now, the first Dragon's Dogma game is known for having some pretty choppy AI, although I was still quite impressed considering the game was made in 2012. Pawns in this game tended to drive you a bit crazy as they fell off cliffs, got in your way, they kept fighting enemies when you were trying to get away, and so on. So I was pretty keen to see after 12 years what the AI was like. And it's basically the same. I had the exact same issues with pawns accidentally killing themselves, wanting to fight everything that moved, and constantly repeating the same thing. These pawns will fight by your side, and they are incredibly important. In this series, you're very much limited by what vocation you are, so you can't choose to be an archer but then also use magic. So your pawns are essential, as you'll need the help of archers, warriors, mages, and more if you want to successfully fight. Unfortunately, this pretty much locks you into needing all 3 pawns at any time, which is too bad if you find them negatively impacting your experience and want to go without. I did find Dragon's Dogma 2 to be much more immersive, which I was so happy with. The graphics are better, the overall feel of the game and how my character feels made it so much more immersive. So to have these pawns then zooming around me, non-stop talking and attacking NPCs really killed this immersion. Just as with the first game, you'll have several vocations to choose from. You'll have your basics to begin with, such as archers, thieves, and mages. And as you progress and explore, you'll come across other, more powerful vocations that you can change to later in the game. Now, as I mentioned before, vocations do restrict what equipment and weapons you can use. And this can be good in a way as it makes your build feel a little bit more important and special. However, I found this so much more restrictive in Dragon's Dogma 2. I chose to be a thief to begin with, and from memory I chose something very similar in the first game. In Dragon's Dogma 2, however, I could only equip daggers, whereas I could equip bows as well in the first game. While this is fine if your pawns go and get themselves killed, which they will, and you're down an archer, it makes things like fighting flying enemies extremely difficult. I also remember vocations just unlocking automatically as you mastered them in the first game, whereas here you have to find them, and I had a lot of trouble with this. So I basically played as a thief for most of my game because I didn't find any other better vocations, and as a thief I was able to really easily dodge attacks. Eventually I changed to a spear build pretty late in the game as it was the only good one I could find, and boy did I regret this. I could no longer dodge, nor could I equip shields, and I basically got my ass handed to me. Another issue I had with Dragon's Dogma 1 was the lack of available equipment and weapons, and this is exactly the same for this game as well. Each city or town will have a handful of the same shops, each with their dedicated stock that does not change over time, so they have the same stock for the entire game. As vocations limit what equipment you can use, I found each shop had 2, maybe 3 of each item that I could actually use, of which one would have lower stats, the other higher, and so on. So really you can't customize your character how you want, because if you want the best weapon choice or armor, you have only one option to choose. And yes, you can find equipment and weapons in chests, however I often found that these were ones that my character could not use because of my vocation. I got to a point where I was browsing once where I basically had to choose between some god-awful, scantily clad armor that had really good defense, or go with something that was more my style but really not as good. I ended up going with the ugly outfit, and I really hated how I looked, further ruining that immersive element for me. So as I said with the first game, more options would have been great. On to combat, which drove me to the brink of madness in the week that I played this game. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a heavily combat-focused game. There are a lot of different aspects here that affect this, such as your pawn selection and your vocation. I found the number of enemies in this game to just be so overwhelming. You can barely walk for 5 seconds without getting attacked by any number of enemies or even mini-bosses. The enemies are mostly the same too, which I was disappointed by, as I was expecting more newer enemies. Just constant thieves, goblins, harpies, and wolves for days. I did have a similar experience with the first game, however my ability to eventually be able to fast travel anywhere I wanted instantly with fairy stones kind of solved this problem. Now they do have the same fast travel here with fairy stones, but I found these stones much more difficult to come by as I wasn't able to get money as quickly, so I could just barely afford them. And I only ever found 3 of these crystal locations to fast travel to in my entire playthrough, as opposed to a dozen or so that I found in the first game. They did add in the extra option of ox carts here, which I was oh so happy about initially, until I realized that you can be interrupted during this fast travel, even multiple times, as you're attacked by enemies or even mini bosses. These carts can only go to a few select towns as well. I am glad they listened to feedback here and added this in nonetheless. It's better than nothing. but it's still frustrating that you can still be attacked and disrupted multiple times just trying to get to a nearby town. I will note though that even with this option of ox carts, the map here is quite big and often where you need to go isn't even near a town, so even with this ox cart travel, it can still take you a really long time to get where you want to go. Now, a new addition that has been added into this game is how your health bar works. This is by far my biggest gripe with this game. Basically, as you take damage, your maximum health can be reduced until you have essentially very little health. And even if you use something like a health elixir, it will only go up to that new maximum. It sucks. To restore this and return your maximum health to normal, you either need to sleep at an inn, which are limited to towns and cities, or you need to make a camp at a campsite, which can be at times tricky to find, often have enemies surrounding it that you'll need to clear, and you can also be woken up in the middle of the night and be attacked anyway. So if you were like me and you were somewhere in Battahl, getting your butt handed to you often, I never had full health, and even if I managed to restore it, it never lasted long. It was just a very frustrating experience. Often I was on my way to a quest location where I would have needed full health, and because the fast travel is kind of crap in this game, I needed to travel quite the distance to reach it, and just being constantly attacked every 5 seconds as you are in this game, your pawns getting killed by falling off cliffs or whatever. By the time I reached my quest point, I had basically no health and no pawns, and I was screwed. I just found this game to be so unnecessarily punishing. And yes, I can appreciate that this game is for people who like a challenge and who enjoy combat galore, but some accessibility options would have been great to make the game more appealing to your average RPG player. There were many things that I loved. I enjoyed exploring the towns, the quests are diverse and interesting, and the world is beautiful, but as this game is 80% combat, this trumped all the good stuff for me. Now, this game cost me about $110 Australian, and the game took me 29 hours to complete. I was expecting quite a big game, so that was really disappointing. I was just suddenly at the end of the game and I was so confused. Keeping in mind I did almost every single side quest that I found, and I also did my best to engage in combat as much as I possibly could. So very frustrated on the price point there. Now, if there's one thing that really did set this game apart from the first game, it was the graphics. Just this big open world with some absolutely stunning views as you travel around. I think for a Capcom game especially, this game is gorgeous. I like that it still has the same kind of feel and look of the first game, just with updated graphics. The menu system is essentially a copy and paste of the first one. However, while I did have a lot of trouble navigating the first game's menu, this one I found much easier to learn. The quests here are also much easier to track and locate, which I had a lot of trouble with in the first game. So overall, presentation, much better. I can honestly say I enjoyed Dragon's Dogma 1 more than this game. I do like the fact that it still feels like a really original Dragon's Dogma game, but it's 2024 and I think what they've done here just isn't good enough. If I was to compare those two games side by side, I would not think there was a 12-year difference there. I did enjoy the setting and the idea of the game. An open world medieval RPG is my jam, but this game is just too brutal and too unforgiving. It was also much too short, and the story did not make sense to me, nor was it interesting from, I'd say, halfway through the game until the end. I normally don't do such harsh reviews, and I'm not saying everyone will hate this game. I'm sure this game is just the perfect 10 out of 10 for many people, but it just wasn't for me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this review helpful, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!